We entered Algeria by the customs hall and began filling in forms. One for ourselves, one for the car, one for our currency. The same forms we'd filled in 200 metres behind us. As we were entering a country, one question was important. Destination in Algeria. The correct answer is transit. They'll let you in if they know you're going out again. You're not going to stay and be an embarrassment to whoever let you in. When filling in the currency form, declare at least as much as you have. You're not allowed to take more out than you brought in. This is good for Algeria's balance of payments, but stops people from earning money in Algeria and taking it away. Moroccan money's useless outside Morocco, so the New Caledonian and the other two change all their money. As we're late and my passport has caused problems, I kept my Moroccan currency. I changed it in Italy or France. There was only about £3 worth left anyway. We spent 4 hours over 2 sets of customs, 4 hours of form filling to go from one desert to another. We eventually got away without examination of either vehicle or luggage. We'll go to the next village and find an hotel, said the New Caledonian. I want to go to Oran tonight, said the Morocco. Get out and walk then, I thought. At the next village, Machnia, there were no petrol stations open, and we needed petrol, so Oran was out. We examined the Hotel Tavna, a large modern place. £5 per person per night. Sod that. In the village there was one hotel, about £1.50 per person per night. The two Moroccans accepted that. Now £5 wasn't going to stretch to South Africa. We'll look for work tomorrow, they resolved. I'd chosen my sleeping place. There was a football pitch across the road from the Hotel Tavna. As long as they don't play all-night football, I'll be safe. But New Caledonian fate took a hand. He booked in at the Hotel Tavna and left me with his car. Not the best of reclining seats, but they reclined, and they were seats. At 7:30 next morning we drove into the village, picking up the other two, then off to the next village, Argile, for breakfast. We bought bread, walked into a cafe, ordered drinks and sent an urchin out for butter. Butter's not common in North Africa, presumably because cheese is easier to keep in the heat. We had to borrow a penknife to spread it. Cafes don't serve food and therefore don't need cutlery, except spoons. We filled up with petrol at 10p a litre and drove off. Having spent 2 days in Morocco, unable to spend my dirhams because of the fast of Ramadan, I found myself in Algeria in the feast of Ramadan. All the shops were open and celebrations going on, but the banks were shut. And as I'd foregone my currency to speed our departure from the customs, the New Caledonian subsidised me on the understanding that I repaid him before leaving. We stopped at El Amria for dinner. Half a barbecued chicken in gravy for about 60p. It was very good and wasn't soup. At 1 p.m. we drove into Oran. Not a especially attractive place. We looked briefly round the city centre and the docks for an open garage to sell the Renault. None were open because of Ramadan. Then we went to a jeweller's in the city centre. Our New Caledonian had bought a ring and was going to sell it. After 15 minutes he came out of the shop. It wasn't real gold. It wasn't a real diamond. But the jeweller would like it for his wife. We went for a second opinion. After an hour and a half he reappeared. The second jeweller had broken the ring. After having it repaired, we'd go back to the first jeweller and complete the transaction, and our New Caledonian would have a £5 profit. My other two comrades would need to learn the art of buying and selling. They couldn't take their currency out of Algeria, but must convert their wages to merchandise, cross the border and reverse the process. But they hadn't got their jobs yet. They decided they'd teach. On the way out of Iran, we stopped to examine new Land Rovers. They were now going to buy one. In the countryside between Iran and Algiers, our New Caledonian showed his haggling technique. We were offered a box of some sort of red fruit, a bit like an underdeveloped strawberry. No idea what they were. They were tasteless but moist. The offer was made by an Arab dangling his fruit by the roadside. 5 dinars. 2. 4. 2. 2. The Arab was defeated. Can you make it 2 dinars and a half loaf on the rear window ledge? Okay. The Arab's negotiating faces saved, at minimal cost to the New Caledonian. It was my loaf. Still, I hadn't paid for it. He had. Night came as we passed through Blida. I wonder which Blida it was named after. The road is straight, dark and busy. From Douala onwards, the road winds downward to Algiers. Lit, characterful, big, busy Algiers. A city, not a big lump of buildings like Iran, but a city of people and individual buildings. Streets, neighbourhoods, teeming life in a living place. I'd expected to travel on tonight out of Algiers, but it was somewhere I'd want to see in daylight. And anyway, it was raining. I don't like getting my sleeping bag wet. First we drove around the city. In the centre we stopped for a coffee. Eventually we decided our next task was to go out to Bab el Oued and look for couscous. They're white, edible things. We didn't find any. Bab el Oued was the scene of a memorable battle in the War of Independence, fought at 3 levels, Frenchmen on the ground, Algerians in tenements, and Frenchmen in helicopters. For an hour or so we wandered around saying, "Nous voulons manger les couscous. Connaissez-vous un restaurant?" And everybody knows one, and they're all closed. We eventually find an hotel restaurant where we have an expensive and very poor meal. I settle up with a New Caledonian in pesetas, and he lets me off very lightly. The 2 Moroccans are getting quite short of money. Our New Caledonian books a hotel room for himself and smuggles the 2 Moroccans upstairs. I again retire to his car and we say our goodbyes as I plan to leave early the next morning. And early next morning it's still pouring. Algiers is a big city, so I've got a few hours walking ahead of me, probably all morning, though the rain may help me get a ride. And locking the car doors behind me, I'm off at 6, from Bab el Oued, through the Kasbah and down to the station, which lies by the waterfront. I approached a ticket collector and asked permission to photograph the trains. "I'm only the ticket collector. You'll have to ask that gent in the white hat over there." So I approached the gent in the white hat over there. "No, it's forbidden." He was surprised I was even asking. So I walked to a footbridge with my camera, but before a train arrived, a helpful Frenchman said it was forbidden to Europeans to photograph trains. Perhaps they're a great military secret. Maybe they're going to fly huge hordes of planes over Europe and drop them on us from a great height. Anyway, I took a photograph. but no one made a public arrest, and I walked on. By now I was soaked to the skin. After a couple of hours I stopped and made tomato soup under a railway arch, walked on in the rain and rested for a while under a flyover. I walked back out into the rain again, and the Citroën Diane stopped. It took me as far as El Harash, which was then at the eastern edge of the city, and back into the rain again. After a long walk, a tinny old 2CV stopped, always a good car for hitchers, as the old Peugeots were. This one's driven very slowly by a small Frenchman with glasses who keeps nearly overtaking buses in the wrong places. He's on his way to Tizi Ouzou. He drops me at the road junction just beyond Thenia. Light rain still falling, and a rainbow frames the peaks of Grand Kabylie beneath the dark clouds. Two small children appear and begin to insult me in Arabic. Eventually a Citroën Diane with 3 young Arabs in it stops. The driver can speak German badly, but he's very proud of it. I can speak German badly and don't enjoy it much, but it's his car and I've got to earn my keep. At Lacdaria, I'm set down and picked up by another political animal, and this one spoke French and talked about the politics of his own country. My job was to listen rather than speak. Algeria, since independence, has tried to pretend France doesn't exist. French isn't taught in schools. Algerians, he said, could go to France but wouldn't be allowed to return. He didn't enjoy living in Algiers because Algiers feels the influence of the administration too much. Oran, Constantine and Tizi Ouzou are better. But though Algeria doesn't believe in France, the Algerians do. Radios are tuned to Radio Monte Carlo. The local radio stations must play French music to compete. French is learned in the home and on the street. The French lifestyle is Europe in a language they understand. Good wages, good homes, plenty of nightlife, freedom of movement. Algeria is afraid of becoming unofficially French, and so stops Algerians from doing what Algerians want to do. Our political discussion moved southeastwards as far as Bouira. After only a short wait, a battered old Arab in a battered old Peugeot stops. He's about 40 in battered old working clothes. He talks about England's troubles. Next to him sits his granddad, who's about 80-ish. He sits, smiles, smokes and nods at everything. They're nice people, and we had a chat about the places I'd been and the people I've met. We stopped eventually at his village, Mansoura, which crouches below the main road. We stopped outside the local cafe, a stone building with stone floor, stone counter and dark interior. There's no milk here, no decorative furniture, only plain coffee and good people. I wasn't looked on as a curiosity or even as a tourist. I was another person. I wasn't allowed to pay for my coffee. I expected this by now. But my Arab friend took me across the road to his house. He asked me to wait outside, and after a moment emerged with money because I'd not yet been able to get any Algerian currency. What did he know of me? Nothing. But he gave. Then he left me to get on with my journey. My next lift came soon. A Frenchman in a Citroën estate car, with a dog in the front seat which moved up and enjoyed my company. The driver didn't understand why I travel alone, why I want to see new things and places and experience life. Perhaps if he'd been with me during the last part of the journey, he would have understood. He takes me to Ein Tagroot and into the evening. And when he's gone, the world is darkness and headlights. At a road junction beyond the village, the end of the ring road, an Arab taxi driver stops. He doesn't speak French, so communication's difficult. After a couple of kilometres, we stop at a stranded van with a flat tyre and give the driver a lift to the next village. We pick up a fare-paying passenger. Does this mean I'm one too? We pass Sétif, drove on and arrived at El Yulma, the destination of our fare-paying passenger. He paid and got out. I too left and went to a cafe. Now I had a little Algerian currency, I could have a café au lait. There wasn't a free table, so I selected a harmless-looking middle-aged parent with a small child and asked if I could join them. Before he could answer, 2 young Arabs at the next table offered me a seat. One of them spoke French, the other French and a little German, which he wanted to practice, so I had to say everything in both languages. They ordered my café au lait. Now that I had currency, I wasn't allowed to spend it. Conversation was varied. One of them had a friend in Abergavenny. "Oh, can I say Abergavenny?" they asked, and at the time I didn't. We talked about the weather. I hadn't expected North Africa to be cold and wet, but it's mountainous in places and gets its share of snow. We talked about the lack of freedom of movement for Algerians. They say that Algerians can go to France and return. It depends on the circumstances. They repeat what I heard all over North Africa. Europe is a magnet, particularly France, because they speak the language and are exposed to French influences. They call a friend over, a small, studious-looking Arab with glasses who can speak a little English, and he tells me he has a friend in Abergavenny. I'm probably the only one who hasn't got a friend in Abergavenny. I'm now required to say everything in 3 languages. We go on to talk about how much I like the people, how I'd heard all about Arab hospitality, and they said that it gets better as you get further into the desert, further from the tourist routes, and I could accept that. I said I'd like to see more of Algeria, and that given time I'd have wanted to cross the Sahara. The Arab who spoke only French was born deep in the desert near Tamanrasset. He also had some Russian blood in him. If I ever return to Algeria, I am to return to the cafe at El Yulma, collect my friend, and off we'll go together. As usual, football cropped up. The mention of Manchester starts it off automatically. All was united in those days, usually with Charlton and Best. West Germany had a big North African following. Their team photo graced the walls of cafes all over North Africa. The English-speaking Arab buys me another drink, and conversation switches to the places I've been in Germany, and then to the places worth seeing in England. I recommend Scotland and Wales. Midnight approached, and I must move on. I walked out of the cafe, stuck my thumb out, and a car stopped. 4 young Africans in a battered old Peugeot driving very fast in the darkness, chasing 4 others in another battered old Peugeot. They passed and repassed one another at speed on the winding roads. Fortunately, they knew the road and were decent drivers. At the next village, Tadj and Annette, I got out and they roared back to El Yulma, passing and repassing one another. I stuck out my thumb again, and the next car stopped. An Arab in his late 30s, his car also an elderly Peugeot. And after a few minutes we left the main road to Constantine, and headed south and arrived at the gate of an army camp up a cul-de-sac. He was lost. For 2 hours we travelled narrow, empty roads through villages that all looked the same in the dark. We stopped at Ain Beda for coffee. I tried unsuccessfully to pay. At 2 a.m. we arrived in Tebessa, a small, friendly town near the Tunisian border. It's long past bedtime, so I'd better look for one, but I'm barely out of the car when it's taken out of my hands. A tatty Arab, who looks an authority on sleeping rough, as I probably do by now, appears and tells me to go to a police station and ask for a bed. Before I can reply, a policeman appeared, as if by magic. The Arab speaks to the policeman, who gives me directions to the police station. It's a big blue building entitled Hotel de Ville, a good name in the circumstances. Excusez-moi. Un gendarme told moi that I could dormir ici. Well, did he now? I don't think we can allow that. What time shall I wake you? I'd like to get up about 6. About 6? You can't stop that long. You can have 4 hours sleep, not a second more. And as it's 2 a.m, this seems fairly reasonable. And the benevolent police force show me my bed. It's a bench 5 feet long and 9 inches wide in the entrance hall. I'd have been more comfortable outside. Still, it wouldn't be polite to say so, and it's best to be polite to policemen. 6 a.m, and he wakes me, and I went. I still have all my Algerian dinars. I'll buy a bit of Algerian pastry and have it for breakfast with a cafe au lait. So I bought a large, crispy pancake thing at a cost of not much and wandered into a cafe. I ordered a coffee, then sat down and munched and quaffed in early morning contentment. I came to the end of my coffee, made a move towards the counter to pay, and there was a mad rush to pay for it. The fastest loser bought me another. This took some getting used to. With thanks to the entire cafe, I eventually left. This won't do. I'll be out of Algeria shortly. It wouldn't be right to take it on to Tunisia unspent. So there's nothing else for it. I'll have to have another breakfast. So I went into another cafe, ordered another drink, and some bastard paid for it. Bugger. I can't keep wandering the cafes of Tebessa being given free breakfast, so I gave up and got on the road. I'll try again elsewhere. It was now the morning of the 20th. It had taken me 10 days from San Sebastian. Only 8 remained, and if I missed the boat back from San Sebastian, I'd have no money for the next. I had a choice of 3 routes from Tebessa. I opted for the first, a main road, but very circuitous, to the south. After 2 hours I was still walking, but they were all going south into the Sahara. I got a lift back to Tebessa. The driver said, "You were going the other way this morning. Some of the other drivers told me about you." Fame. The idiot with the soups arrived. I got back to Tebessa and set out on Route 3. After a short time waiting, a young lad in an old car stops and tells me I should have chosen Route 2. He takes me as far as Morsot, the next village, which is full of Arabs not going anywhere. Doesn't look promising. However, 2 young Arabs stop and talk. "You'll never get a lift," they say cheerfully. A villager drives up. They persuade him it's a good idea to travel to the next village. So he collects a couple of fare-paying passengers and returns for the three of us, the two youngsters deciding to go and see relatives there, and pay for my fare as well as their own. There's a shotgun pointing back from between the front seats. I'm in the middle of the back seat and I worry with every bump in the road. And when we arrive in Loinet, it's dinner time, and they buy my dinner. I meet the younger lad's uncle and he buys me a coffee. So I've still got nearly all my Algerian currency. From here I get a lift to Amdourach in a lorry, then on to Drea in a Fiat. The driver tells me there's a train due. And I should get it. But I can't afford it. You don't have to pay. It's a goods train. It's normal practice in Algeria, or at least in desert areas like this. A railwayman passed my luggage up to me when I got on, and we arrived in Souk-Haras, back on the main road by 2 p.m. An urchin followed me for a mile or so through Souk-Haras. Then came three more, showing me how their sheep could walk on its hind legs. I wasn't impressed. I've been doing it for years. There weren't many cars about. I got a couple of short, frightening lifts. Between Souk-Haras and the Tunisian border are the Montagne de la Magerda. Big things they are. Big, round and green. The roads are narrow and winding, badly laid and full of corners you can't see round. And everyone assumes there's nothing coming the other way. As we came round the corner doing about 60, there was suddenly someone coming the other way, and we were going to hit them. And then we missed them, and we were going over the cliff edge. And then we weren't, and we were all still alive, and I've no idea how. Evening, and I walked on. Eventually a carload of Arabs stopped. Again we drove far too fast, and the door against which I was crushed kept flying open. The driver was annoyed with me for having an open door next to me. "Shut the bloody door," he kept saying. I kept shutting the bloody door, but the bloody door kept opening again. It's all part of life's rich pattern, I thought to myself, as I held onto the door with one hand, the seat in front with the other, and hoped my sleeping bag would cushion the impact when we had the inevitable head-on collision. But somehow we didn't. And I became quite good at not falling out of cars. We stopped several kilometres short of the border, and I walked on into the darkness. "Monsieur, monsieur!" What now? An Arab in the dark. "Monsieur!" It was a fellow passenger from the car. He was Moroccan and had just travelled from there without luggage or passport. He was going to Tunisia and was terrified of whatever befalls passportless Arabs at the border. On we walked. He kept saying, "Shh," and walking on tiptoe, in case the customs post should be hidden behind a nearby bush and jump out at us. We walked for a long time before the lights of the building shone at us, and he clung to my wrists, panic in his eyes, his voice and his shaking hands. He didn't know what to do. I couldn't see the problem, but then I had nothing to worry about. I explained that all he had to do was get well away from the road and cross the fields. There were no barbed wire fences or anything like that. In the meantime, all I had to do was go through customs with my passport. To reassure him, I promised to keep them talking for as long as I could, to give him chance to get past. Highly melodramatic, but it calmed him down a bit. I left him with a handshake for luck, which he shouldn't need, and he left me with an overpowering thank you, which I didn't deserve. I walked on into the customs post. No one about. He wouldn't have needed to worry. After 5 minutes knocking on closed doors and wandering corridors I probably shouldn't have wandered, I unearthed someone to stamp my passport. A small guard dog followed me amiably about, and I made a fuss of him to keep him inside the building. I filled in the usual forms, answered the usual questions, and asked a few myself, about train times, sailings to Sicily, all sorts of things they couldn't answer. Then there was a barking and a loud cry outside. They had more than one guide dog, and the Arab had tried to walk right past the building instead of taking an extra few minutes to get a few minutes away. The customs officer ran out and soon came back. It was only an Arab. Only an Arab, making a journey halfway across Africa, doing something that frightened him more than I'd ever seen anyone frightened. I was allowed through and walked on in the dark. It was 20 kilometres to the Tunisian customs post. In the darkness on either side were, probably, nomadic shepherds. At one point an Arab stood on a rock, looking over the valley, a rifle in his hand. After perhaps an hour, the road plunged into dark forest, and twisted and turned as if trying in vain to escape the darkness. Suddenly a dog barked, and a torch picked me out. A Tunisian soldier escorted me into a hut, and I was interrogated, then allowed onwards. 7 more kilometres to the Tunisian customs, the road snaking down the hill. Ahead, drums start to beat, slowly and rhythmically. There are people around. I don't know where, but they must hear my step on the gravel, the regular sound of the water I carry on my back. And dogs bark in the forest on either side of me. And from 2 yards away, a voice tells me to keep quiet.